Hello, welcome to the channel No Spear. In this video, we are going to know about the rise of English language. As you all know, language is an organized system of communication. It is also a natural human growth, partly mental and partly physical. Language is dynamic. It keeps changing according to its needs. Same is with the language English. For our convenience, it has been divided into three parts, that is Old English, Middle English and Modern English. The Old English, also called as Anglo-Saxon period, it covers the period from the earliest written documents about the end of 7th century to the beginning of 12th century. The English language and literature began far back with the beginning of the history of the English people on the continent of Europe. It began with the songs and stories of the time when the Teutonic ancestors of English people were living on the borders of the North Sea. The Jutes, Angles, and Saxons, the three tribes of these ancestors, conquered Britain in the later half of the 5th century and laid the foundation of the English nation. Before the conquest of Norman, English language was pure, with very little foreign elements in it. There were only a few Latin words and some Old Norse words were borrowed into the language. Another important character of Old English is its flexional system. There were four case endings for the nouns and adjectives, and for example today we have modern forms of the nouns. Stone, stone, stones, stones. But in Old English the flexional endings for the four cases in the singular and plural are different. Old English had greater number of grammatical forms than modern English. Since the period is used for the use of inflections, it is called as the period of full inflections. In pronunciation and syntax, Old English was better. Modern English spelling is not strictly phonetic, but the Old English was phonetic. It did not have the silent syllable like that of present day English. The word order in Old English sentences was therefore free and verb often came at the very end of the sentences. For example, others voyager. The Old English had numerous dialectal forms. Barely one of them survived was the language of King Alfred's Wessex. The King Alfred, who drove back the Danes from England, began the writing of prose in Wessex. There were large-scale literary production from this dialect. Even the literalism of other dialects was influenced by West Saxon dialect. Therefore, West Saxon became the dialect of Old English. The Middle English. Middle English extends from about 1100 to 1450 AD. It begins with the Norman conquest and ends with the transition period, leading to the loss of medieval ages. Sweeping changes in the vocabulary marks this period. This period marked a new beginning in England. William, the Duke of Normandy, conquered the Anglo-Saxon England in the Battle of Hastings. Norman forged the spirit of nationalism and marked the beginning of a new language and literature. It is the period of formation of English language. The following five major dialects of Anglo-Saxon period continued to develop. First, the Old Northumbrian dialect consisting of the lowland Scots and Northern English. Second, East Midlands and West Midlands corresponding to Mercian. Third, Southwestern or Mercian. Fourth, Southeastern or Kentish. Fifth, Southwestern or West Saxon, which was used in Old English period. The new cross currents influenced the growth and development of language. The Anglo-Saxon speech simplified itself by dropping most of its Teutonic inflections and absorbed eventually large part of French vocabulary. The East Midland dialect, under the influence of French, developed into the received standard English of today. The French influences were observed on both language and literature. The basic character of English vocabulary was finally lost. The Norman rules introduced so many words were different from the Old Norse. As far as inflections are concerned, they had already become much blurred and weakened the influence of Old Norse. Here, Old Norse means the North Germanic language of medieval Norway, Iceland, Denmark, and Sweden up to the 14th century, from which the Scandinavian language are derived. Before the Norman conquest first caused it by Scandinavian invasions and influenced the northern and midland dialect early. But the Norman conquest, which brought Norman rule in England, brought so many changes as seen above. Hence, the Middle English period is termed as period of level inflections. This weakening of inflections caused the word order to become less free. It encouraged the growth of prepositions. French translators left their mark on English spelling and pronunciations. As a result, English has lost much of its homogeneity. Latin was used for all learned work, and Norman French was the language of aristocratic life, while English was reduced to the position of a set of spoken dialects with no common efforts made to evolve a standard or literary form. In 14th century, England became the center of commercial, political and ecclesiastical life. The dialect of London emerged as the widespread medium of written expression. Since England was inhabited by the people of very heterogeneous nature, the dialect of London was mixed dialect. The meanness of the Oxford and Cambridge helped to make London dialect something wider and more acceptable. Middle English period came to an end with the introduction of printing in England by Caxton. The later half of 15th century marks the transition from Middle English to Modern English. The Modern English. The Modern English period extends from the beginning of the 16th century to the present day. Modern English is subdivided into Early Modern English and Later Modern English. The Early Modern English covers the period from the end of reign of King Henry VII to the accession of Queen Anne to the present day. The period between the loss of Middle Ages and the beginning of Renaissance is called Age of Transition. The modern period is distinguished by a vast and varied increase in the Latin elements, the Renaissance influence. Here Renaissance means intellectual rebirth which showed itself the effort of individual to free himself from the rigid institutions of the Middle Ages, feudalism and the church, and to assert his right to live, to think and to express himself in accordance with more flexible secular code. This Renaissance led to innumerable borrowings from the Latin and Greek. Numerous words were related to technology were borrowed from Latin and Greek. Besides these words, English language freely borrowed words from all languages spoken by the people of its colonies. Even many words of Sanskrit were borrowed into English. Another characteristic of modern English is the loss of many of those inflections which had already been labeled in Middle English. This period is also called as period of lost inflections. The most interesting development during this period is the change in the pronunciation of the vowels. During this period, English vowels formerly had nearly the sounds of classical Latin were changed into their present sounds. It was perhaps during this time the English spelling was fixed by the printers. So this was the rise and growth of English language. We have seen the journey of the English from Anglo-Saxon period to today's modern day English. Hope you loved this. Do like, share and subscribe the channel Nosphere for more such interesting informative videos. Thank you.